Our next speaker is Dr. Joseph Coughlin. He's the director of the MIT Technology Age Lab, and he is one of Fast Company magazine's 100 most creative people in business, and was named by the Wall Street Journal as one of 12 pioneers inventing the future of aging and how we will all live, work, and play tomorrow. His research seeks to understand how demographic change, social trends, and technologies converge to drive future innovations in business and government. He's the author of the online publication Disruptive Demographics, and he was appointed by President Bush to the White House Conference on Aging Advisory Committee. Recent online publications on disruptivedemographics.com have been titled Aging as an Extreme Sport. So this is serious business, but who says you can't have a little fun? Please welcome Dr. Joseph Coughlin.
Thanks. Good afternoon. Well, come on, you've had your coffee, you're sure to. I want to thank everyone for coming, and also thank especially the World Congress and ITS America's Scott Belcher for inviting me and helping put together friends and colleagues here today. I want to talk a little bit about the aging population that we've been sharing with, but also the convergence of that aging population with new technology. What are the opportunities, but also what are the challenges? And I think you heard Administrator Strickland and Chairwoman Hersman speak to them. First off, let's look at the population we're designing for. These are the people your parents told you to worry about, or warned you about. Imagine this, in the United States alone, the numbers are far more drastic in Europe, Japan, South Korea, and other parts of Asia. But one baby boomer, that noisy group between 1946 and 64, is turning 65 one every 7 seconds. That means a nation of Floridas. And if you've been driving out there, you can imagine in many ways what that might be. But humor aside, this is the vision that we all love, we all cherish, and are pushing in the other room. The automated highway, the automated cockpit, the automated world of transportation. And indeed, this has been a vision for a number of years, since the 1930s, the 50s, to even the classic TV car kit there that could talk and drive for you. That's where we want to go. This is being powered by the availability of technology and by aerospace engineering meeting the vehicle. The challenge we have is, this is who we think we are designing for. They're young, they're fun, they're the first adopters of every little gadget there is out there. But there's a problem with that. That vision that the next, what's next, is always going to be purchased by someone who's in their 20s or maybe even younger, instead is purchased by someone who looks like this. This is the lead adopter. If you look at the cars that are high-tech, high-style, and high-priced, the average age is well into the 50s, if not the 60s. And in fact, these numbers are a little bit lower because if you take away the so-called entry-level models of the higher-end sedans, those numbers that are in their 40s and 50s or mid-50s jump well into the lower 60s. So as much as I love the new technology, the intelligence, the smart, the devices and the systems that we've all been envisioning for 20, 30, and 40 years that are now reality in cost and in design, what we have to start thinking about is the paradox that the new high-tech, high-priced buyer is actually someone who's much likely to be in their 60s and beyond than it is someone else. So here are the challenges I want to lay out in front of you. And yes, this was a piece from 1958 in Popular Science, talk about the car that drives itself. I would suggest that we need to take head-on 3 things. One, and David Strickland spoke to this in a bit, learning and the new older driver with respect to new technology. Second, cognitive load. It is a bit about distraction, but also how we learn to use these systems. But also, and I think there's some examples that you can see here at the Congress, where none of these technologies are not just improving safety, but they're improving well-being behind the wheel. First, you know, new technology is very interesting. It's almost in many ways a trip to the past. This is an article, believe it or not, from 1927 New York Times. And it suggested that the new technology going into the cars then required that the experienced car owner may have the most difficult time shaking off old behaviors. Well, fast forward many years, and anyway, we have much the same problem. Technology learning is now becoming a sharp focus, whether it was new interfaces in BMW and Lexus and Daimler to control a central controller with a screen, to the lessons from using analog brakes without anyone telling us that that sound of the transmission sounding like it was coming out of the engine is actually a good thing and you should continue to press the brakes. Novel interfaces that we learn on the fly, because how many of us honestly actually ever read the directions? And the promise of active safety is a great promise. It has and will save lives if we understand how to use it and understand that the reason why the car's doing that is for my own good and not so distracting that it runs me off the road. The difficulty that we have is that our mental model, how we learn to drive, science tells us about between 17 and 25 is when we start to get an understanding of how technology works, how those things that we appreciate and understand what they are frozen into our memory. This is the car, if you will, that I grew up with when I first became aware of cars as a kid. So this is kind of my mental model starting as a young kid. Let's go to the car that I learned to drive. A little bit more complicated, not much. Let's jump up forward. All of a sudden now we have ITS entering the car with the little messages there telling us that it was a system problem. But now we go a little bit further up, and now it's getting a little bit more complicated. Clusters are having, you can tell the designers are having a hard time. Do we put everything in one place or do we spread it over? But now watch what happens. Now, very quickly, it's getting to the point where you almost need to be checked out as a pilot. Now that was over a period of upwards of 30 to 40 years. As little as 2 years, the same car has gone to this. Yes, many of these devices are warnings. Some are for navigation, some are for comfort, and some are for entertainment. But the fact of the matter is, the mental model that I had, now that I'm standing here before you at 50, is looking at this saying, now where's the instruction book or where's the dealer to change how I buy and how I learn the vehicle? Across the lifespan, we have to start thinking about how we think in terms of learning overall and how we will use technology. So I'll give you some good news on some research we've done. Older drivers like technology, particularly older women over 60 are more likely to use technology than men. Apparently, not only do we not use maps at a younger age, but we're not willing to use anything else at an older age. The good news as well, they are less likely to be distracted by nomadic devices, cell phones, iPad, whatever it is that you're bringing into the car. But as many of us can tell as we age, the channels to access that driver become more diminished. Hearing, vision, haptic function, and the like. And indeed, health and medication issues may make it more difficult to be able to sync all these conflicting pieces of information. So let's look at apparently another person at MIT back in 1936 suggested that the vehicles that were coming out then may be sacrificing safety for style. What I want to say is that we're not going to sacrifice safety, but we need to balance the competition for what's next with what safety and what convenience can bring to the vehicle. So what does that look like? First off, novelty engenders some real high levels of trust among younger drivers. Because it's new and it's a widget, younger drivers like the technology. Older drivers will use new devices in the car, but here's the problem. Because they've got a mental model of how the car is supposed to work, they will be distracted if a warning goes off and it's not clearly evident as to why it went off. So where younger users will trust without verifying, that is backing up until a toddler or a trike is behind them, an older driver is going to be distracted by trusting and, shall we say, verifying whether that warning is accurate. And then longevity. How can we start thinking about technology to improve driver well-being and longevity behind the wheel? As our earlier presentation noted, 70% of Americans in particular live in suburban or rural areas where alternatives to the car do not exist. So with respect to transportation and safety in older drivers, birthdays do not kill, health conditions do. 110 million Americans, regardless of age, have one chronic disease, 60 million have two, and 20 million have the lucky of 5 diseases. So how can we start to think about how the car can manage well-being and our ability to drive well and safely behind the vehicle? And we're starting to see some of those things already on the market, from Toyota to Ford to a variety of other cars. This is our own test vehicle at MIT, the Aware car, that is not only able to detect everything from distraction to fatigue to stress, but we envision a car that's going to detect how well you are, how well you're performing, but then change performance in real time to be able to reinvigorate, renew, and refresh the driver to be able to get them back into an optimal performance zone. So if you're driving in the red, the car will do something around sound, light, temperature, whatever it might be to improve you overall. So I don't want to just point out a challenge, because I think that the opportunity for new intelligent transportation systems to improve the longevity, to improve the safety and overall seamless mobility of an aging society is phenomenal. However, before we go into the vision of autonomy, it's going to be wrought with a number of speed bumps. So let me give you some recommendations as to how we should address those. One, I'm a researcher, so the first question, the answer is, of course, conduct research to come up with better understandings of how we learn and accept new technology. We simply put it out on the market, and if people take it, then it must be a success. There's got to be a model that can be quantified, that can be used by multiple companies and governments to either regulate or to stimulate innovation that minimizes workload, increases design that excites and delights the consumer at any age, and increases performance behind the wheel. Process. I would submit to you that except for a few countries around the world, the process of buying the vehicle has not changed for several decades. The same time my father bought a car, basically I had the same experience buying a car recently. You get into the vehicle, here's the keys, here's the stereo, here's the seat, good luck with that. We need to reinvent driver education across the lifespan. The vehicle is going to be changing far more technologically, far faster than it has ever done before. We can even see by the number of mechanical engineers that are exiting the auto industry and the number of electrical engineers entering the auto industry. We're now driving a computer. We're not driving a mechanical device. And that new car buyer experience and lifetime education has to reflect the changing technology behind the wheel. And as a matter of public policy, this is more than safety. I would submit that the industry is at risk of having its innovation stymied by the evolution of what I consider to be a new class of liability. Whereas, the classic liability definition is what is the reasonable man standard. And the vehicle for many, many decades has been designed around the reasonable man. He happens to be 5'10", 27 years old, and 167 pounds. Well, the average driver out there is more likely now to look like a reasonable older woman standard. As we saw with Chair Hersman's presentation, she is likely to be smaller, she is likely to be osteoporotic, and she is likely maybe to even have challenges about learning the new technology because we did not teach it to her well. So we need to really start to think about how do we design not an older person's car, because we know that an older person's car a young man will never buy, but neither will an older man. But we need to be alive and well in terms of thinking about the technology, the design, and the policies that go before that. So on that note, I will conclude my remarks, and thank you very much.